Okay, we'll get started. Thank you again very much for attending today. We're going to be talking about what you can't see will cost you, a cloud strategy for Oracle license management. It's going to be a good interactive webinar. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat window at any point during the presentation, and we'll try to get to those questions. We have a Q&A towards the end. Right now, we've got two experts. We have an expert from Insight and from iQuate who will help to outline the perils and the opportunities of Oracle license management. So let's get started. I'll introduce our two panelists. First of all, we've got Aman Cullen, iQuate's EMEA Alliances Director. He has more than 15 years experience in the SAM space, working with a long list of industry-leading tech providers such as EMC, Aspera, Snow Software, Flexera, and more. Hello, Aman. Welcome. And we also have Frederick Philipson. He's the Executive Consultant on the global team for Insight EMEA. He's got almost a decade of experience in Oracle tech sales, and he's leading the Oracle Optimization Consulting Group with expertise in Oracle renewals and certification, audit defense services, and cost reduction. It's great to have you both here, and welcome. Thank you for your time today. Aman, I was wondering if you could give a little background on iQuate and what the company does and what your solution provides.
Sure. Thanks very much, Parker, and thanks for the warm welcome, and appreciate the opportunity. So, yeah, just a little bit about iQuate. So iQuate was originally founded back in 2002. So we've been around sort of 15 plus years or so. We're actually headquartered in Dublin, Ireland, and of course we have global presence and sales offices just around the globe as well. So we are a truly global organization. We have supported many of our enterprise clients, varying in shapes and sizes. If we looked at perhaps an example of one of our largest customers, AIG, for example, they have around sort of 100,000 servers, right the way down to some of our smallest customers with only a few hundred servers. So, you know, it's quite a wide variety of different customers with different use cases. Predominantly, we've focused traditionally on key vendor partners, so key vendors such as Microsoft, VMware, IBM. But in the context of today's discussion, we're going to be talking about Oracle, as we are indeed an Oracle verified solution. So the product technology that we're going to talk about today is around, you know, both the IQ Sonar solution, which is our long-standing solution in this space. We do have another product, but more on that perhaps another time.
All right, great. Thank you, Aman. So, Frederick, perhaps you could give us a little background on Insight and how your organization works complementary to the technology that iQuate provides.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I work in an organization called Insight LCS. We are a global software optimization unit, and we consist of about 20 people across Europe. And we are covering IBM, SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft. We're 4 people only dedicated to Oracle, so I have no idea what Microsoft licensing or IBM licensing. I only work with Oracle projects. We help clients to Insight. It could be that, or even non-Insight clients. We help companies around the globe, primarily in Europe and the US, with different types of Oracle challenges. So it varies. It could be that you've been audited by Oracle and would like to have help reviewing their findings. Is the findings correct from Oracle? We help clients optimize what they have purchased. So it could be just providing license modeling to maximize the existing investments. It can provide benchmarking to procurement and advice to procurement what to tell Oracle in order to get the best possible price. We often are involved in support reductions, so we help clients move shelfware of their agreements and overall reducing Oracle support fees. But we also work very often with ULAs, and in average, for the past 3 years, our team has been helping approximately 10 clients per year, either renewing or certifying Oracle ULAs. And so we are here to share some best practices for how you can renew or certify your Oracle ULA.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Frederick. So let's take a look at our agenda today. We've got, we'll start out with a little bit about your Oracle ULA, how that works and what are the main challenges. Then we'll talk about building a solution. How do you understand your deployment for cost control and risk management? Then we'll talk about a little bit about how the technology works, how IQ Sonar works. We'll see a brief demo. And then we'll also see how the Insight services take that information that you get from IQ Sonar and help you to better position your organization for the future. At the end, we'll summarize what we have, and like I said, we'll have a Q&A with some your questions and some answers. So let's start with a little bit of background on the Oracle Unlimited License Agreement, the ULA, and what that is and how that works. Let's take a look here. And so, Frederick, maybe you could just start out with sort of giving us some background on the ULA and how this works. You're the expert in that area.
Okay, yeah, sure. So Oracle ULA contract model is Oracle's enterprise agreement. They do have a few other variations, but the unlimited agreement is by far the most common. They've released a few years ago something called PULA, which is a perpetual ULA, which is almost the same thing as an Oracle ULA. But an Oracle ULA can be, it's a time-limited agreement. It's 1 to 5 years. It is specifying certain Oracle products. You decide, you can tell Oracle or negotiate which products to include. It's primarily technology. So I think we mostly see Oracle database and middleware in ULAs. That's by far the most best use cases for Oracle Unlimited Agreement. Simplified, this is an all-you-can-eat agreement. If you sign an Oracle ULA for 3 years, at the end of this agreement, you need to tell Oracle how much you have deployed Oracle software, because you have the right to deploy as much as you want. Potentially, it could be 50,000 CPUs. And there's no true-up of support at the end, so there's a lot of misunderstandings about that when I speak to clients. So you can over-deploy even more than what you told Oracle when you signed this ULA. There's no penalties for this. So you should have a strategy to maximize the ULAs. I personally think this is a great agreement. I think it's far better than the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, but it requires you to have knowledge about the contract and keeping track of the deployments, because a lot of customers sign a ULA and they think it's a great agreement, but because they don't understand really the text, or Oracle is not explaining the processes, and also many don't understand how easy it is to become non-compliant with Oracle software.
Sure, I know a lot of organizations, Frederick, that after 1 or 2 years, their environments change almost completely, right? That's a huge risk. So let's hear some. Maybe you can isolate what are the top 3 risks or perils that companies have to go through that you've seen in your experience.
Okay, well, let's start with cloud. And for me, this is probably very much in the cutting edge, because we are seeing this when we're helping clients now to, obviously a lot of ULAs are expiring or being renewed at the end of May, which is Oracle's financial year. So we are helping clients that have had a 3-year ULA, and they were dead set on actually exiting the ULA. We are helping them collect where is Oracle installed, and now we're discovering, for example, we have a client that have deployed approximately 100 CPUs of Oracle database in Azure, and the customer did not read the contract, because there's a paragraph in the certification clause. Well, Oracle have 20 pages of contracts. You actually need to understand what does every text means. And there's one line basically saying that you cannot count any license entitlement in cloud at the end of the ULA. So these 100 CPU licenses that they have in Azure, when their ULA expires, they are non-compliant. So this is a big challenge for customers out there. And another customer that was saying, well, we signed the ULA, and now we're asking all the IT business units to please provide us where they have deployed Oracle. And then they come back and they've deployed it in cloud, and we have, well, 5 weeks left to basically resolve the issue. So it's a major headache. And I'm of the opinion that Oracle will be forced to change their ULA contracts in the future. The second challenge we see is that you are, for example, if you're exiting your ULA, and assuming you have no cloud, you tell them, well, we have approximately 1,000 CPUs on premise here, please verify. And Oracle verifies, and you are certified by Oracle. You have 1,000 CPUs. You're now out of your ULA. But what Oracle is often doing is 6 months or 12 months after the ULA, you will have an audit letter. And if you have not provided them or counted every installation, possibly Oracle do the audit and they say, well, you actually need 1,100 CPUs. Oracle will then ask you that you need to purchase those 100 CPUs, even though they were deployed under the ULA. You will now need to purchase 100 CPUs, which has a list price of $5 million.
Oof.
And I think it's just, if you have such a big Oracle estate, and if you're like 1% unsure of, or 5% unsure of where Oracle is installed, just remember it's 2 cores of Intel equals 1 CPU license, and that's $50,000. So this is something that we're seeing quite often in the market. So I actually say you need to overcount. That should be your strategy. You should overcount. And also, just final stealth audit. What this means is that at the end of your ULA, if you tell Oracle that you will exit your ULA, they will ask you to run their audit scripts on your environment. And that is not part of the contract, but they are doing that because once you say that you're not going to pay them more money, they're looking for a reason why you should really renew your ULA, and the best reason is non-compliant.
Wow, those are some serious risks that can cost a lot of real money. That's something that, and the way organizations change over time, I can see how that would be a very common issue and a problem. So, Amin, maybe you could tell us a bit about the technology involved here, IQ Sonar, and how that works to help, give customers the knowledge they need to take control of this situation.
Sure. Yeah, of course, Parker. And as that slide depicts, it really is a matter of trying to get a better understanding of your deployments in order to be able to have some concrete evidence and analysis to be able to challenge Oracle on based on factual consumption. So it comes down to really the data that you're going to need to gather. First of all, you're going to need to identify what Oracle instances and what software instances actually out there. So where are my Oracle instances? So you'd need to scan your environment, identify what's out there from an Oracle standpoint. And then, of course, going a further level down, once you've identified those instances, you're probably going to need to understand a bit more about those particular instances. So if it's databases, what are the different editions? What are the versions, the options, the packs, and the variances in terms of, not just what's deployed, but actually what's actually being used. And quite often there's a big distinction there. The applications actually in use are what would constitute the licensing. Beyond that, of course, you then need to look at hardware metrics as well in terms of what CPU counts they are, and of course the factory units vary depending on the hardware that you've got deployed. And then in addition to that, not just the hardware layer, you're also going to need to look at the virtualization and perhaps clustering technologies that might also be deployed as well. And of course, as you become more and more virtualized and have high availability technologies, it becomes quite challenging to try and unbuckle all of that and figure out where you've got those deployments. So, quite often you've got instances where you've got clusters upon clusters, and it becomes a very, very complex environment. What you need, of course, is you need to be able to capture all of this information. An Oracle verified toolsets actually only cover the databases, but of course, toolsets like ours cover beyond that. So it also goes into middleware as well. So from that perspective.
That's great. So I imagine you have some examples of some situations where you've saved organizations a lot by providing them with this information, right? I mean, I think you have some scenarios here. Here's one that looks pretty compelling.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly run through this one. So this was for a very large logistics organization. They were actually going through a negotiation specifically for Oracle. At the time, they had around 6,000 odd servers, and the overall duration of the project was a 9-month period. They were particularly challenged because they had several tools. As with very large organizations, quite often you've got multiple tool sets deployed in there. The likes of HPU Discovery, the likes of BMC, I believe, SCCM, lots of those asset management orientated technologies as well as service management orientated technologies. But the challenge they had, they couldn't quite get the data that they needed. They even tried to use scripts, etc. as well. And of course that just didn't prove viable for them because of the time it would take, but also the complexity that unearthed as well. And of course, it was error-prone. By the time you've done your scans, the data becomes out of date. So what these guys needed was a very quick, lightweight solution, very scalable to actually go into the environment and actually discover the data, specifically target the data that they needed. And what we were able to do with these guys was actually identify very quickly, gather the data they were looking for. We believe in terms of outcomes, the return on investment was achieved somewhere within the first couple of months. And actually, over a 3-year period, it did actually result in a cost reduction of around $25 million. And of course, they then expanded the use case beyond Oracle and into other vendors as well.
That's amazing. I would imagine then the more complicated the organization with more business units, it gets even more complicated. It gets even more difficult to find. But sometimes time is very short as well, correct? I mean, that's
absolutely. Coming on to the next example we have is a telecoms organization. So these guys were, just as you described there, very, very fragmented. These guys had 15 independent business units running. And of course, there were local outsourced partners as well. And of course, it added to the level of governance that we needed to run through. They were also incredibly, kind of constricted to some tight time scales. And what we needed to do there was actually get the right coverage for Oracle. But actually, we did it by using a sort of follow the sun type of support model, where we would deploy into an environment, capture the data, move on to the next, and move on to the next, and continually cycle that through. This particular customer managed to capture the data that they needed very, very fast, and the upside to these guys was they originally budgeted $30 million for this particular negotiation, and were able to gather that, reduce that down to only $2 million cost. So it was a direct correlation between the investment they made in us and the cost reduction.
That is significant. That's amazing. So again, there are a lot of organizations out there, I think, that are coming to the end of their ULA agreement, and there may be a panic setting in. I think you have an example of an organization like that was trying to figure out what to do. They thought they had the right tool, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, so the next example, really just a much smaller organization, but actually incredibly complex, heavily virtualized, heavily clustered, and actually, as to Frederick's earlier point, they were maximizing the usage and consumption of their ULA agreements. They had lots of databases and options in usage and being utilized. So they were going through that process of, do we exit from the contract? What do we need to do in terms of realign and refresh a lot of old hardware that they were running this on as well. So this particular customer, we ran those scans, but actually we identified risks for the organization because an Oracle ULA doesn't actually cover all of the options and packs. So there are certain products that are restricted within the agreement, and it's well worth noting that you need to try and ensure that you've got visibility of those instances as well. We were able to capture those, and before, well in advance of the actual agreement coming to an end, the client was able to take corrective action. And as a result of that, they were able to avoid significant costs. We don't know the exact amounts in terms of the cost avoidance, but certainly they managed an ROI of greater than 10 to 1, only within a matter of months.
Wow, that is fantastic. These are very compelling stories. I mean, this is obviously you're saving organizations a lot of money and helping to position them to save even more money going forward. If you could just take us through a quick overview of the architecture of the technology of IQ Sonar, just to explain to us a little bit about how it works from a high level.
Sure. So typically, most organizations, they will need to scan an environment and a network, and usually most other tool sets, you'd need to deploy agents or scan parts of the environment, and it doesn't give you the full coverage. What we do is we're agentless, so we will absolutely target the environment in a very lightweight, very quick manner, and actually we do this securely, so we can actually integrate into third-party credential management systems like CyberArk, for instance. So to capture that data, accelerate the project, but also what we do is we can actually pass on that very rich data center-centric data into other solutions as well. So if you already have tools like an Aspera, Avanti, Flexera, or Snow software, we can actually directly provide data into those solutions as well. So it's more of a complementary rather than a rip and replace scenario.
That's great. That's terrific. Well, now I would like to have just a quick look here at how it works. And I'd like to introduce Sam Cole, who's iQuate Solutions Architect. Hello, Sam. And
Hi,
I'd like to give you a chance to show us exactly how this works with IQ Sonar. So I'm passing along the screen to you.
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Parker. Hopefully you can see my screen here.
I can. Thank you.
Okay, so this is IQ Sonar, our on-premise multi-vendor agentless discovery tool. Today I'm going to show you a little bit about our capabilities around Oracle discovery. Just to reiterate what Ammon said, so IQ Sonar is certified by the Oracle third-party tools program, and we're certified to the latest level, which is 17.2. So I'll just talk to you about the quick setup. So it's very quick to deploy and very quick to discover the environment. What we need to do to populate the tool is with what we call target set. So this is the actual details of the environment to discover. So whether that be individual host names, IP addresses, or network ranges. We also add the discovery credentials. So these are the agentless credentials that we use to discover the environment. We support CyberArk for integration with password management tools for added security. And we also support SSH proxies in a more complicated, more secure environment. Once that's all set up, we can discover the environment and then check the results. So the discovery can run as a one-off activity or as part of a schedule over time, depending on the needs of the environment. And once the discovery is running, we can check its progress. We can also diagnose if there's any issues with discovery. So maybe we had invalid credentials to access the servers, for example, and we can diagnose and view those results here. Okay, I'm going to visualize the results here. So just to concentrate on servers with Oracle databases and their environment. So if I zoom in here, I have a cluster, ESX cluster here with some Oracle databases on. And this is a particular Oracle database instance. So I'm going to zoom in here and we can view the information that we've discovered for this particular Oracle instance. So we have the version information, where it's hosted, details around what ports in use, etc. We can see the deployed databases. In this case, it's just a single database instance deployed here. we've captured and analyzed the application features, whether they're installed or in use, actual user schemas, sessions, and crucially the packs and whether they have been used or not. We can also look at the actual physical and virtual hardware and pull out the same sort of metrics that we would need from a licensing perspective. So if we drill down to the actual server hosting that database, in this case it's a virtual server. It's a Linux virtual server, and I can see the version. It's a Red Hat enterprise server, particular release version, amount of memory and CPU summary. And then we can view and drill down into components. So I have particular network databases, storage set up on here, an amount of space. Crucially for the Oracle side, CPU information, CPUs, cores, etc., and other asset management information that may be necessary. And I can do the same for the virtual infrastructure. So in this case, it's a particular ESX. And we can drill down and view the hardware, as crucially the CPU data around that virtual infrastructure. Any savvy license experts out there might realize I've made a crucial mistake in the deployment structure of my Oracle farm here. So I actually have this symbolizes a VMware cluster. And I've deployed some Oracle instances, but only utilizing one of the ESXs in my VMware cluster. That could cause me some licensing issues, depending on the arrangements I have with Oracle, because I'm entitled to license the whole cluster. So it could be very costly for me if I wasn't in an ELA and I wasn't in the right structure. So that's useful to pointing out, and this visualization is an easy way to visualize that. Other methods of viewing the data, we have a REST API. I can do that here, so you can extract the data into other third-party tools. We also have a reporting element, and I can produce a similar report to the Oracle worksheet, or certainly the data that we'd needed to populate that across databases and Oracle middleware components. For example, the options, and then the physical infrastructure, physical and virtual infrastructure that's deployed on. And we also do produce the 3PTV output. So this has increased from 6 to actually 8 files now as part of the 17.2 certification. But this is a summarized view of all of the Oracle of the estate that can easily be provided to Oracle in a license audit situation. Back to you then, Parker.
Fantastic, Sam. That is wonderful. That's a lot of information that you can have access to right away, very quickly. So it's again, I can see the value of that, and I see how we've saved, how you guys have used this to save customers so much money. Now, I'd like to move on just for a second from the how it works to back to Frederick and say, well, what can you do with all this information? I know you have expertise and experts at your disposal, but given the right information, I would think you could really help customers out even more with that.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So there are very strong benefits for having accurate and trustworthy data, and a tool like iQuate can provide that. So in practically, what does it help me when I'm supporting clients with ULAs, renewals, or exits? Well, first off, if we are able to detect that there is anything deployed in any cloud platform, you can then, instead of being, as the example I used before, if you're working without any tooling and basically Oracle is asking you 1 month before the ULA expires, please provide us with all the numbers. First off, you're going to be spending a lot of time filling in their spreadsheets manually. There could be mistakes being made. It's also having trouble getting all the data from all the application owners. What is the hardware? And then when you actually have all the information and then you run the scripts and then you send it over to Oracle, then you're just awaiting, hoping for the best. But if you have full data and you can see that if you're running, for example, iQuake 6 months before, and you can see that there is cloud deployments, you have different options. So one option can be to move these cloud deployments to on-premise before the ULA expires. At least you should alert the application owner or whoever is responsible for the cloud deployment that at the end of the ULA, they need to purchase a new license for this deployment from Oracle. It could also be that, well, maybe you have deployed so much in different cloud platforms that it makes sense to renew your ULA. Because if your ULA now doesn't expire and you constantly renew it, you don't have any risk. But then the question is, when are you ever going to be able to stop out? So it could be that the more you move into cloud deployments and the longer you have a ULA, the more locked in you are in the ULA. So I know we live in the era where you all want choices, but this is could be a very, very hard lock-in from the vendor. But also, if you're looking at signing a ULA, you do have the possibility of actually negotiating with Oracle about this certification clause. So I mentioned the standard ULA contract does not allow you to count any 0 cloud deployments to your exit numbers. However, before you sign a ULA, you can negotiate with Oracle with the right arguments why a certain percentage of your overall numbers can be counted to a cloud. You can count clouds to your exit numbers. Also, avoid undercounting. As I said, if you miss simply 2 cores of database, that's a risk of $50,000. I think it's fairly easy to see an ROI in actually taking the time or actually even using ourselves or even any other tool to actually make sure that you have found all the Oracle deployments. But also the great thing is that what Sam just showed is that if you run this iQuake tool, it's going to tell you if you have used database options that is not part of your ULA. So instead of the alternative is that Oracle is going to ask you to run their scripts, and then you hand it over to them, and they might come back and say, okay, dear client, you have these number of CPUs, but you have also deployed or used advanced compression, and it could be advanced security, and you have a $7 million shortfall here. So we suggest that you sign a ULA for that amount. But if you actually are able to find this out before you hand over Oracle all the data, you can actually go and take, okay, maybe I'm going to ask Oracle for the best possible offer for a renewal, and it might be priced at $2 million or $1 million. So it's for you to take control over this ULA process.
That's great. So perhaps, Frederick, you could walk through a little bit about how this process works with Insight, how you guys help customers at every step of the way, and where IQ Sonar fits in with that.
Okay. Yes. So we help clients regardless if they have decided to step out of their ULA or if they are going to renew. Sometimes they want our help to make a more better informed decision, what is best for our company, and we can provide them with alternatives and recommendations, what we think is the best course of action. And this is a blueprint for how we help clients with this. So we start with the contract analysis, and that's to understand what products are included, but also understand is there any limitations or risks involved in your contract, which actually, a good example is we were reviewing an Oracle ULA that the customer wanted to exit, but they actually had deployed there was a limitation in the ULA contract saying that they can only deploy in certain countries. And now, 3 years in the future, the customer had deployed in other countries that was not part of the ULA. And then the change was actually, well, maybe we need to renew. So it's important to review your contract for these things. And then you can use IQ Sonar, for example. It's a great tool to save time instead of doing this manually, but also give you all the information and not wait for Oracle to run their scripts. And also avoid missing any deployments. I can't understate how important that is. And also cloud and also database options, what has been used and what is not. But it can also be used for WebLogic and Oracle middleware. We then help our clients after we have configured and scanned your network for Oracle deployments. We look at the data, analyze it, how many licenses are required, are there any sort of data that iQuate cannot capture and that we need to do a more manual review. We do that. Once we have a license position, there are many actions you can take. So obviously one action should always be to maximize the deployments that you have. How can we, because the best, I think that this is probably the most important, because if you're able to maximize and deploy more Oracle software, you might not need to renew your ULA, because you might have actually made such an optimization / maximization that you have a license buffer of 25%. And then the case for actually renewing a ULA with those products is not there. We help clients with the cloud strategy. How are you going to align your ULA contract with cloud? What are the options out there? What can you do about it? So this is done in a workshop format with our clients. And then we present a ULA value analysis presentation, which explains to you what has been the value that you got from your current ULA. What are the values of signing a new ULA? Which products should be part of that? Is the price actually competitive? And if you decide to renew or sign a ULA, we help you benchmark your ULA to make sure that you're not overpaying to Oracle. We try to identify any sort of hidden cost or risky clauses that might cause your company to end up in a compliance position down the road. We help you improve the contract terms. Oracle have a very good strategy, is that there's so many different contract items out there that you can ask for, but they're not going to put it in the agreement. You need to know what to ask for. So we share with you what contract items you can ask for in terms of audits, trials, support costs, and cloud rights. And then we support also your procurement team negotiating this agreement. So we are not negotiating with Oracle. We are just providing you advice. What are the products Oracle wants you to buy? How difficult is it to negotiate these contract terms? And what should you focus on in the negotiation? What is easily obtained? And then hopefully you achieve market best ULA contract.
That's great. So we've got 5 steps here. I'd love to see some examples of the value that you bring at each of those stages, and bring some real-world numbers into that. If you could explain some of that, Frederick, that would be fantastic.
Well, I think we can start first with reducing risk. So with Oracle software, the biggest challenge is not that you're overusing Oracle software. It is that possibly you have deployed something by mistake, something has been activated or used by mistake. And this is, if you are able to do this analysis of the database options and also look at how you deployed Oracle, most of this can sort of, if you just have the right information, you can possibly remove 90 up to 100% of this risk. And I actually, in all the ULA projects that we have done, we have not been involved in a ULA project where the non-compliance risk has been less than 2 million euros. And sometimes most of that can be completely eliminated if you actually know this. But if you run Oracle scripts and hand it over to them, they're not going to let you simply pay nothing here. It's extremely difficult to be compliant with Oracle. Not even Oracle DBAs knows what features requires a license. So there's no warnings, there's no triggers. Some of Oracle's licensing, if you just run a SQL prompt and type something in, it requires a license. And even here in our team, we are only working with Oracle licensing and have done so combined for 40 years. And sometimes we get questions, so we're using this feature in the database. Does it require a license? We don't know. We have to look it up. And I don't think that it's very difficult for anyone to to have this knowledge. What's the financial impact of this is that when we ask clients, why did you renew? 7 out of 10 have told us that this is due to non-compliance. Either they found out it by themselves and signed a great agreement, or Oracle found out and they paid a lot more. If you are able to find this out before handing over the data to Oracle, you're going to save millions of dollars. It's as simple as that. If you start putting in the numbers how much Oracle software costs, this is what you're talking about. And then license optimization is basically, I think the best example is we actually made a ULA. We helped the clients exit the ULA, and I think they certified on 1,500 CPUs. And then 6 months later, they came back and said, we're looking at buying more database licenses. And I was thinking, well, we should have actually maximized more here, because then they wouldn't need to buy these licenses for $1 million. So try to maximize using VMware, LPARs, making sure that you're actually deploying all the products in your ULA. When I was at Oracle sales, sometimes a customer would call me. We are 2 years into our ULA, and we have a 3-year ULA. And they said, we need to have an extension for another year, at least. How much is it going to cost us? So they paid money just because they didn't have a plan on how to actually make the most out of their ULA. And something we also help our clients is by removing unused software from their agreements. And often we save approximately 20%.
Significant. So yeah, I see the savings potential is pretty substantial and significant on this. That's those numbers are, again, very compelling. I was wondering if Frederick and Aman, if you wouldn't mind taking just a few minutes to kind of summarize how the technology and the expertise work together, and how you guys work together really to empower Oracle customers to do the right thing and to really facilitate their growth and cloud strategies going forward. So I'll start with you, Aman.
Yeah, I think the suggestion would be to try and utilize solution set that can very quickly and accurately get the data that you're looking for. It's not just about the depth of the data coverage; it's also about the breadth in terms of completeness. So certainly going out there and utilizing that. The reality is if you're using scripts, etc., quite often you can miss instances. So, I suppose with the IQ Sonar approach, you're not going to have to use those scripts and potentially be very error prone. The solution set does stack up and is actually accepted by Oracle, and therefore it mitigates a lot of that requirement. And of course, the intention is to try and cut through the complexity. So you can't manage what you can't see. Essentially, it's that old cliche that applies here. And from our perspective, it's a matter of trying to cut through the complexity, get visibility, and get the actual detail you need on your actual usage, and then use that to your own advantage, rather than handing Oracle the advantage by getting them to run scripts in your environment.
And that's where your team really comes in, Frederick, right? That's
exactly. So my free advice for anyone that's looking at an Oracle ULA is that take control of your ULA process. It takes much more time than you think. I think being proactive will save your company millions of dollars. And by also being proactive, you can prevent problems before they happen. For example, if you are able to scan your network on a regular basis and discover any sort of, let's say, either it's a cloud deployment, as I said, you can alert the application owner that this will need to be put down at a certain time, or they will need to purchase licenses at the end of the ULA. But also, you can easily spot if there's any misuse of database options in your Oracle deployments. and then you can find out who has used licenses that is not part of the ULA. Could be that there needs to be a few DBAs that need to have some training on what is actually included in the ULA. Instead of waiting at the end of the ULA and 3-6 months, and you have a huge gap, and you're fighting with Oracle that you don't want to run their scripts. But also align your Oracle ULA with your company's cloud strategy. Remember, a standard ULA agreement is an on-premise agreement, not cloud.
So what I'm hearing from you guys both is that you guys together with the information and the leadership you provide, you can help customers align Oracle licenses for that cloud migration that everybody's involved in right now, and eliminate undercounting, which exposes organizations to huge risk. And again, just that lack of knowledge can cost you what you don't see. And you can avoid the stealth audit risks. Your organization gets the first view of what you actually have. It's not the other way around. And finally, you can optimize for cost efficiency and growth going forward. It's really a forward-looking and empowering strategy that you guys are talking about. I think that's awesome. So right now we have a few more minutes left, and I'd like to go to some questions. It looks like we've got some questions from the group here today. I hope you guys are ready for some good questions here. First one, when should I start scanning and preparing for my ULA exit? If an organization is thinking of leaving their ULA, when should they do that?
Yeah, so I can probably take that question, Parker. So yeah, I suppose the sooner the better is usually best practice. You want to prepare in advance. You'd want to do this probably sort of within at least a few months of the ULA expiring. Get yourself in a position where you've got the visibility that you're looking for, and of course ensuring that you've got a good baseline to go into those negotiations with. It may make sense for you to continue on with that ULA, but at least you can make an informed decision when you have the appropriate data to hand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense. A related question I have here is, how often do you scan an IP network segment to ensure the current data is represented here? That's a good question, I think. So
I suppose it depends on the environment. It's a bit like asking how long a piece of string is. The reality is it depends on how many assets we're trying to cover off, and how often those assets are obviously continuing on the network. So the reality is you can scan anything as often as every hour, or perhaps scan during out of hours. Our solution is reasonably likely very, very limited impact on the actual targets that you're scanning. So our approach would be start off with less frequent scans, and then increase the intensity as you start building up a picture. But it is very much in the context of the client.
That makes sense. That's good. So I have another question here. Maybe this is for both of you. Who are some of the typical stakeholders that you work with these projects? And that might be for Alman and Frederick for that one. Who are the folks who usually lead these sorts of projects with you guys?
Sure. So from a data center perspective, usually there'd be a senior sponsor for the actual project, sort of leading the charge on the activity. From our perspective, quite often that may well include IT director, IT manager, and then we obviously as a data center solution, we need to get into that environment. So usually network administration, DBAs, etc. Those are the types of folks that we'd normally engage with, including security, because obviously the solution has to be vetted as well, and security needs to be comfortable that it is going to be adhering to the security parameters of that organization. But of course, usually we run through those any reservations that the client may have on that note. And I suppose it's slightly different from a license management perspective. Frederick, could you add to that?
Yeah. So well, every project is differently, and every customer have different stakeholders. But typically, we work with clients where we provide help to their software asset management team. So it's workshops, it's providing analysis, deployments, advice, and then we work with the procurement team to help them understand what can be done better in terms of pricing and contract terms. Sometimes we also involve architects to understand what is their strategy going forward with Oracle. How much growth do they see in the future? Is there any plans for new applications that requires Oracle? What is their cloud strategy? And often the CTO or the CIO is involved if they are taking any sort of lead in the Oracle negotiations. We provide coaching and education on the workshops so that our clients can negotiate much better with Oracle.
That's great. I think we've just got time for one more question, but I think it's a good one. And it relates back to a slide that we showed. What's the difference between IQ Sonar and other solutions like Flexera, Snow, Aspera? What does iQuate offer that they don't? You mentioned, I think, that they're complementary, but perhaps you could elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, so I suppose from a solution perspective, we absolutely are complementary. So what we found is, the solutions that you mentioned there, the Asperas, the Flexeras, the Snows of the world, their concentration is generally on the license management side of things. So they can form reconciliations, help you manage the contracts down to the licenses. But usually, when it comes to the actual discovery of licensed data, they do have, some of them have quite significant weaknesses in those areas. Quite often, you would normally be required to roll out one of their agents into the data center, and of course, in the data center environment, that can be incredibly challenging, and of course, can have a massive impact on the network. And of course, it takes a lot of time to roll out agents within that environment. So our approach is obviously agentless, which means that we don't install anything on the devices that we're looking to scan. We're very, very lightweight, very, very quick to gather the results. We can do projects in an incredibly timely manner and bring back the results. And we're very targeted in terms of what we're looking for, specifically Oracle databases, specifically the options, the packs, specifically the middleware. So we can very much limit the scanning to only focus on those attributes and bring that data back. And usually we can either provide it to consultants like at Insight, but also we can integrate directly into those solutions as well. And hopefully they can provide a more rounded view. So we're not about replacing these technologies. We absolutely are about enriching their data sets.
Right. So you're really complementary. It's not just a SAM tool that we're talking about. This is something that helps you all the way around with your strategy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right. Well, I wanted to let our audience know. Frederick, do you have something?
No,
okay.
I don't have
all right.
nothing no.
Just checking. Okay. I wanted to let our audience know that for a brief time right now, thanks to our cooperation here, we have a completely confidential and free IQ Sonar trial and Insight consultation on offer to customers out there. This is, of course, we work with you directly. It is totally confidential. We give you the information so that you can then more effectively negotiate with Oracle. That's what it's all about. But for now, you can reach out to Aman and or Frederick for a brief time and have a free trial and Insight consultation. This could mean that you could save millions right off the bat. You could see how you could save enormous amounts of money with the right technology and the right minds behind this. I think we've made a very powerful case today that it's well worth looking into for any size organization. Any words of wisdom you'd like to pass along, Aman, Frederick?
Yeah, so I suppose from our perspective, yeah, we're absolutely looking forward to the discussions, and from our perspective, this is about having confidence in the solution. So we're running that trial period, and of course that does include the consultation as well. So if you want to speak to us in confidence, please reach out to us privately, and we can then perhaps discuss your specific case and see what support we can deliver.
All right. Well, thank you both very, very much for the wonderful and informative presentation today. I hope we've helped a lot of folks out there demystify and plan for the future a little bit better. And again, I appreciate the time and the insight and the proof you offered for us. It's pretty powerful stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone watching. I appreciate your time and effort. This webinar will be available in recorded form after. We will send you emails regarding that, and please do contact us when you can, because I think we have a great, you can save enormous amounts of money very quickly with the technology and the insight that we offer together. All right, thanks.